Hi, Dr. Maureen.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here.
Yeah,
It's awesome to be able to kind of share my story and share some tips with your audience, so I appreciate that.
of course. I'm so happy you're here too. So tell us a little bit about you. Where are you calling in from?
Yeah, so calling in from North Carolina, I recently moved here after retiring from 29 years as an active duty Army officer. I am a physician, I'm a coach, but most importantly, I'm a mom. I have three kids. My middle child, who is a daughter, was diagnosed with pediatric neuroblastoma as an infant, survived that. And then I got to be the physician to diagnose her with type 1 diabetes, so that her medical journey has kind of led me to the place where I am in life and helping other moms who have type 1 diabetic kids.
I love that. I love that especially because I was actually diagnosed as an adult. So I did not experience it as a kid, but I went
Yeah,
to a kids camp, a type 1 diabetes kids camp as a counselor, and I was overwhelmed. And I have type 1
yeah.
diabetes. And I was so overwhelmed. And so I appreciate anybody who is helping any parents out there with kids of type 1.
Yeah. And it's funny because I've had some people say like, "Oh, you're a doctor and have taken care of type 1 diabetics. It must have been way easier for you when your daughter got diagnosed with it." And I always explain it wasn't easier. It wasn't harder either. It was just different. That, a lot of parents who don't have a medical background have a lot of overwhelm when they get that diagnosis in their kid because they're learning all the medical lingo. Well, when I diagnosed my daughter with it, that I knew exactly what that meant. And so in that moment, it was all of these thoughts about how our life was going to drastically change and everything that was going to go wrong was going to, because that's the story I had created in my mind in the moment. So it was different. My overwhelm came from a different place, but it wasn't easier.
I can see that. I can see there being a benefit to
Yeah.
knowing enough, but then also it harmful because I didn't know anything either when I was diagnosed. And so I had to do the whole education phase first, which you
Yes.
already knew that side of it. But I can see it being scary too, because you're like, oh my gosh, I know what could happen already.
Right.
So that can
Right.
be very scary.
Yeah. But the perspective that I then had as a physician after her diagnosis had just changed. Like, I thought back to patients I had taken care of and thought to myself like, "Oh my goodness, like I really truly had no idea why I was hounding them about like, why is this sugar high right here?" And and I would get, I don't know, and then living it, I got it. Like, don't ask those questions because there's so many factors that play into blood sugar control that you're never going to figure out like the one thing. It's looking for patterns.
And unfortunately, that happens way too often. Like I know a lot
Way too
of type
often.
ones hate to go to their endocrinologist
Yeah,
because that's kind of how the approach is. They're like, "Well, were 200 last week. Why were you 200?" And you're like, "I don't know. I don't even
yeah,
remember." And so
right.
yeah, it is a little frustrating, but I mean, I don't want to say it's good that your daughter had type 1 diabetes, but it's great that you got that perspective, the real life perspective, because
Yeah,
there's only so much you can learn when you're not
right,
a type 1 or have somebody
right.
in your family with type 1. So there is a blessing in disguise in this diagnosis.
Yeah. And the biggest thing I want your listeners to hear is that there are challenges that come in life, whether that be type 1 diabetes, whether that be financial problems, whether that be career or school problems. There's challenges that we always face. That's just part of life. But we have a choice when we're facing those challenges. And that choice is we can either allow life to happen to us and we like crumple in a ball and hope it goes away quick, or we can figure out how to make that challenge into a gift and really learn from whatever that challenge is. Easier said than done, especially in the moment. But I look back now and having gone through a cancer journey with her as an infant, really, I understand now, prepared me for being her mom when she got diabetes. And her having diabetes really changed the way that I interact with patients and am able to help them in such a unique personal way that I would have never been able to have otherwise. So being able to turn it into a gift is really our opportunity to take advantage of.
Absolutely. So could you tell us a little bit more in detail about your daughter's diagnosis with the cancer and then also with type 1?
Yeah, sure. When I was a kid, I had kind of two dreams, the dream of being a mom and the dream of being a doctor. And I can even remember like playing doctor with the neighborhood kids or playing the game of life and trying to collect as many like little daughters and sons in my vehicle around that game. I was very fortunate and was able to accomplish both of those dreams. When I was in my pediatric residency, my daughter, who's my second child, was 6 months old at the time and was diagnosed with neuroblastoma. They found a lump in her belly. Again, like it was what I was talking about earlier with I knew what that meant because I had taken care of patients who had neuroblastoma. So I felt like my world came crashing in and that this dream of being a mom was getting stolen from me. I focused a lot of attention on her health and I ignored every other part of my life. I went to a very dark place and told everyone I was fine, knew I really wasn't. Things got better with time, and my daughter did well with surgery and chemo and the whole works. As we got farther away from things that I felt a little bit more at ease. Then when she was 12, she went to a school for the arts for dance and texted me from school and said, Mom, you need to bring home whatever you need to bring home. I have peed 12 times today. Something's wrong. And so in my mind, I was like, we've had cancer before. Like I've checked that box. This is just a urinary tract infection. I'm sure of it because nothing bad could happen again. Like we're not that unlucky. I got a urine cup and urine dipstick to bring over to her school so that I could make this diagnosis of a urinary tract infection and get her the antibiotics she needed before we went all the way home and I'd have to turn around and come all the way back. When we were in the school bathroom after she had called me in when she peed in the cup, I stood there with her and dipped the urine, and immediately, like, the glucose was super dark, and I knew right away, like, there's only one thing that does that, so I start to cry. She's like, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And I said, "Well, you have diabetes." And now she's starting to cry, but doesn't even understand why. And she says, "Am I going to die?" And I said, "No, no, 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 sweetheart, you're not going to die." And she said, "Well, why are you crying?" And I said, "Because I don't want you to have diabetes." And that moment, what in that tiny school bathroom was the moment that changed our lives forever. And we went off to the hospital. She thankfully was diagnosed early, so not in DKA, but it was a tough drive to the hospital. Tough drive to the hospital.
I can't believe that. I feel so bad for like the whole situation. That's terrible. And I'm curious, like, do you think the cancer and diabetes are related at all?
They have to be because nobody can really be that unlucky. So I have just from my profession looked into it. There's not a lot of medical literature connecting those two, but her type of cancer, neuroblastoma, is weird kind of cancer that has a lot of immune changes that can go along with it. Type 1 diabetes isn't a common one, but either the cancer gave her the diabetes or the chemotherapy that she had as part of that cancer had to give her the diabetes. They have to be somehow related because, like I said, you cannot be that unlucky.
Yeah, I agree. There's got to be something related to that. I mean,
Right,
I'm not a doctor at all, but it just seems very odd that that would be and close in age too. I mean, she wasn't that much older when she was
right.
diagnosed with type 1. So that is insane. So how old is she now?
She is 23.
23. Okay. And how
Yeah.
is she doing with her type 1?
She is doing incredible. And she is a medical student. She's in her fourth year of school. She's doing an MD PhD. So it's her second year of the PhD part and is studying autoimmunity. And I tell you, this is another example of that taking a challenge and turning it into a gift. And she is a total nerd about the immune system, and I have no doubt that she will contribute to finding a cure for type 1.
We need people like that. Like we really
Yeah,
do. There is a silver lining there too, because because she was diagnosed with type 1 and probably also the cancer made her want to go into medical
right.
school, become a doctor. Because so I was diagnosed at 29, and
Mhm.
now that I've learned so much, I sometimes am like, oh man, I kind of wish I was diagnosed earlier so I could have went to med school, because that was not even an option for me
Right.
before. But now I'm like, because I'm in it, I wish I kind of could have done that. I mean, I still can, but it's a
Yeah.
little bit of my life for that. So that's not going to happen. But yeah, so I'm glad that something is coming out of it for her.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And, when she was in college trying to explore like how to figure out how to finance schools, she's like, "Oh, I'll just join the military like you, mom, and they'll pay for medical school." And I said, "Sweetheart, like you can't do that. That the military won't take you because of your diabetes." And she's like, "No problem. I'll get an islet cell transplant and then I'll have the military pay for it because I'll be fixed of my diabetes." And I said, "Well, there's two problems with that. First, you can't get an islet cell transplant right now. And secondly, the military still wouldn't take you after a transplant because there's not enough data to say you'll be fine forever." And that like forced her to figure out another path of how to go to medical school, which then opened the possibility of MD, PhD programs. So she would have never been where she was today had she not had diabetes because she would have just followed the path that I took to going to medical school.
Yeah. Wow. So how was type 1 for you? Like raising her, because 12 is still young, which she's, I guess, old enough to know some of it and be able to control some of it on her own, but you still have to assist. So how was it for you?
Oh, overwhelming. And, but again, like I am grateful for the experience of it because I, when we kind of got settled with like, getting discharged from the hospital and out of like the honeymoon period and we figured out, all the carb counting, all the things. I realized, you know what? I don't want to go into that dark place that I was in years earlier when she had neuroblastoma. So I really prioritized and was very proactive about my own emotional health because I knew that I was never going to be the best mom I could be if I wasn't emotionally well. So I listened to podcasts, I read books, I found a coach. I really went and spent time with figuring out how could I take care of myself to do things like advocate for her and teach her how to advocate and be able to stay organized and teach her to stay organized and figure out like how I could have this support system of people who I could depend on, but I could also vent to. And so I loved that I was able to have the experience of years earlier and knowing I didn't do it well to teach me how to do it better. I then, reaped the benefits of having a coach and being proactive. Years later, became leader in medicine at our hospital and wanted to get better at mentorship. So became a certified life coach to help with mentorship at the hospital. Realized quickly that the tools that I learned in coaching were helping patients I was taking care of in clinic and helping their families, which is how this all kind of led to then being extremely passionate about helping parents of type 1 diabetic kids because there is help out there. And, the thing that I'm sure you experienced that she did too was she remembered life without diabetes. And there's this grieving process that you have to go through, even as a parent, you go through it to grieve this loss of this life that you thought you were going to have and get to this point of acceptance of this new life that you're forced to have and figuring out how to make it a beautiful, purposeful life. And it's, takes some work to be able to do that, especially when you're a kid who is getting ready to go through puberty because all of the drama of teenage years was there. It was just layered with diabetes on top of it. So life's challenging, like I said, no matter what your challenge is. If it wasn't type 1 diabetes, it was going to be something else. So,
Yes, and I'm not saying men don't have it easier than us, but women do have that extra challenge with type
oh,
1, with the menstrual
yeah,
cycle and everything like that. And then eventually pregnancy down the road. It's like everything just keeps getting thrown at us.
yes, yes,
And then when you mentioned about acceptance, that's so true too. I mean, I have interviewed people that have had type 1 diabetes for 20 years that still like go to therapy for it. And they're like, it changes, when you have a new life event, something will happen, you're like, I hate this diabetes, and it's kind of like a
yes,
ongoing acceptance. It's never like you accept it and you're done and you're happy and everything's great.
right.
It's a constant acceptance that you have to go through, and I'm sure it's the same way for parents.
Yeah. And the other part about teenage years is that developmentally is the time when kids are trying to figure out who they are and pushing the boundaries and trying to see where they fit in and trying to get, friends that they can depend on and figuring out the whole friends and dating and all that. So adding something that makes you different just adds to that challenge of those years. But as parents, it's the realization that we really have the power to be able to help our kids through that. We can't protect them and make it so that they don't have to go through that time, but helping them to be able to highlight that they're the thing that makes them different can actually make them an amazing friend and a beautiful person is really where we can help our kids do a great job through those years.
I'm curious, do you ever remember her coming home, ever like saying somebody made fun of her because of her diabetes or anything like that?
Oh, for sure. And I do have a great story about that. So, the one day she's standing outside of her high school classroom, and it was a cross country meeting for interest in joining the cross country team. So one of her friends walked by and said, "What are you doing here? Like, why are you waiting here?" Now, she wasn't there to participate in the meeting. She was there waiting for another friend. And she's like, because I'm going to join cross country. And he looks at her and he's like, well, you can't. You have diabetes. And that's all he needed to say. She went to that meeting like impromptu. She joined the cross country team, hated every living minute of it, but she was going to run and she was going to prove this person wrong. And it's moments like that as a parent for, to take that and show her like, look what you did. Like you showed them and stood up for yourself. And yes, you can do all of these great things, even though you have this condition that you need to think about exercise and food and health as part of it, it still doesn't stop you from doing something.
Good for her. That's
Yeah,
amazing. I love that story. That's awesome. And another thing is like, I wish there was more education around type 1 diabetes, even for just the general community. Because even then, it's like when little kids are making fun of somebody else for having type 1 diabetes, it's like, if only you actually knew anything about it, you would not be making fun of me. You would probably feel
right.
very sorry for me, or like whatever.
Yes.
And that's, I think, also the frustration around type 1 diabetes, and
Yeah,
especially not to bring up type 2, but all the media, all they do is talk about type 2 diabetes. And so
right.
when you say diabetes, that's what they think of, and we get thrown into that mix while it's completely a different disease.
Completely different. Like, it should really have two different names. It really should. And I mean, I have thought that even as a medical student, learning about the two different types, but they're not two different types of the same disease. They're totally different diseases. So it just adds confusion. But watching somebody who has type 1 diabetes, it is so frustrating, as I'm sure all of your listeners can relate to, when somebody starts talking about, well, you should watch what you eat or you should exercise more, or, all of those like common things that are about type 2 that have nothing to do with type 1. It's just like annoying and frustrating.
Yes, it absolutely is. So tell us more about what you're doing now, because you're still helping coach other families with
Yeah.
type 1.
Yep. So I help coach parents, more so moms who have kids with type 1 diabetes. And I really help them with learning advocacy and organizing their lives, along with, organizing their minds, because there is mental drama and fear that can run your life if you don't control all of the thoughts that go in your mind as part of this. And then also I help them and teach them like how to really build a good support system. And I love what I do. I love watching families go from being overwhelmed to realizing that this is something that can actually make them stronger family and stronger person.
Do you help people all over the country or just in your
Mhm.
local area?
All over the country. I do coaching over Zoom, so I've even done it with moms who are in Canada and over in Europe. So, yeah,
That's amazing. I love that. And yeah, I can't imagine being a parent with a kid, especially if you don't know anything about type 1. It's like, where do you even start? So it's great that
right.
you are even offering this. And community is so huge with type 1, whether you're a parent or someone living with it. You have to know other people that are going through the same
Right.
thing, because otherwise you're going to feel so lonely, lost, confused. And you're probably going to go through that depression phase, where if you have a community around you that's knows what you're talking about and what you're
Yeah.
going through, it makes such a difference.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think helps is when folks have been parents of type 1 diabetic kids for a while, that both in the type 1 diabetic person and the parent, there's this burnout that happens. And because you're just tired of it. You're tired thinking about it. And so trying to figure out like how to make it so that it does stay top of mind without getting in the way of other great things that you want to do in your life is pretty important. So I also help folks not just in that immediate like diagnosis period, but after they've had it for a long time because of the probability of running into burnout.
Absolutely. And you need to know the education side right when you're
Yeah,
diagnosed, or just, like what even is type 1.
right,
But then the lifestyle portion is so important too, where, you shouldn't not go to an event because of your diabetes. Like you should
right,
somebody told me this once, they always said life first, diabetes second, and I loved that because it is so true. Like you should not turn something down because your diabetes is being awful
right.
to you that day or whatever the case may be. And so I think that that's great. So, do
Yeah.
you have any advice for someone maybe that's newly diagnosed, for a parent of somebody newly diagnosed?
So I would say my biggest advice is quite simple, and it's going to be okay. I think the more that folks hear that, the more they truly believe it. And when something becomes a real belief, that we start living from that belief. It is hard, there's no doubt about it, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be okay. That we have that opportunity to make a change if we're thinking that something is challenging or it's not going the way that we want it to. Taking that step to making a change allows you to change direction, but it's still going to be okay in the end.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, you will be okay. We promise. Everything will be okay.
Yes.
And I'm curious, because you have like that medical background, what do you think like type 1 diabetes will be like in 10 years? Do you think it's going to improve? Do you think it's going to get worse as in more people are going to get type 1, or what do you think it's going to happen?
Well, I think we've already seen an increase in the number of people getting type 1. I look at when I was a kid, I didn't know anybody with type 1. Then my daughter comes along. She didn't have any real classmates with it. Her younger sibling is 8 years younger than her. And my youngest child had five type 1 diabetics in the same school in elementary school. So clearly, the incidence of it is increasing. I certainly hope that 10 years from now, because of where we are with closed loop systems and understanding more about the immune system, I certainly hope that in 10 years that we're super close, if not having a cure, that we're ridiculously close to being cured.
I agree. I think there will be something out there, an option for people. My only fear is that the costs associated with that won't be,
Mm,
most people won't be able to afford it. So we're kind of stuck. It's like, oh, there's that option, but it's going to cost, whatever, $1 million. And it's like, okay, well, so I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But I agree. Even if it's only a pump option or whatever, I think it will basically be a pancreas on the outside of our body where we won't even have to think
right,
about it, which would be
right.
absolutely amazing.
Yeah, amazing. I'm reading Peter Attia's book Outlive right now, and the book offers this new concept to thinking about medicine and about how, autoimmunity is on the rise and cancer risk is on the rise, and that medicine has always looked at all of these problems as kind of whack-a-moles, that we're getting much better with the treatment of it. But let's even take a step back and figure out, how does it not occur in the first place? Or how do we screen even earlier for it? And I believe the same thing could happen with type 1 diabetes. We've already gotten better with thinking about screening siblings of type 1 diabetics. And I think having books out there like Peter Attia's book raises curiosity of people who are in that research space to be able to think about these diseases in a very different way. Instead of thinking about better treatments, think about backing it up so that we're preventing it from happening even before someone gets symptoms.
Yes, even if you Google it, it says like type 1 diabetes is gonna like 5 times the amount in the next 10 years. And I think the same. It's like, whoa, 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 let's stop this and figure out why
Right,
that's even happening.
right,
Except then you, in my opinion, you have the other side of the, the big pharma companies that kind of want us to get it so they can grow their revenue, and which is terrible, but it's kind of both sides. But if they could even come
right,
up with something to protect us from it that costs money, then that would be way better, because it is
right.
it's a terrible disease.
Yeah.
So if somebody is looking for some extra help or some extra assistance of a kid that has type 1, how do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so my website is maureenmichellemd.com. Michelle is spelt with one L, and that's a great way to get a hold of me. I'm also on Instagram as Maureen Michelle MD and on Facebook.
Great. Yeah, we'll add all of those below so everyone can have access to them. But thank you so much for being here. It's great to meet you and learn about you.
This was such a fun conversation. I'm so glad we got the opportunity to do this. Thank you.
Yes, me too. Thank you.